The ARARA board hopes you are all well. And I'm Linda Olson, as he said, the Vice President of the American Rock Art Research Association. I'm a rock art documentation specialist, and I reside in Minot, North Dakota, where we're enjoying some great fall weather today. The ARARA board is composed of 8 elected individuals. You'll meet us introducing the speakers of these presentations. The American Rock Art Research Association is a diverse community of members with wide-ranging interests who are dedicated to rock art preservation, research, and education in order to communicate to a broad audience the significance of rock art as a non-renewable resource of enduring cultural value and an important expression of our shared cultural heritage. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The ARARA board and the ad hoc online events committee are pleased that you've joined us for this online event. We are planning to host more online events, so please stop in and visit us on the website or on the Facebook page. Stay up to date on the ARARA happenings and like us on Facebook so you get those, or Instagram now. The website has information you might find helpful and interesting as you learn more about our organization. We invite you to please consider renewing, or if you haven't been a member, to please join ARARA. Your membership support is important to our organization. Zoom's tools provide the chat box that can be accessed at the bottom of your screen when you hover over the window, and your questions can be entered for the formal question and answer period following the presentation. Tonight, I'm honored to present a scholar of rock art, Thomas Sanders. Sanders worked at historic sites for 35 years. From 1998 until 2016, he was the site manager at the Minnesota Historical Society's Jeffers Petroglyph Historic Site. With the guidance and participation of members of Arapaho, Cheyenne, Dakota, Lakota, Shoshone, and Anishinaabe communities, he developed the education and preservation programs at Jeffers Petroglyphs. Sanders has worked with Dakota elders to record and preserve cultural histories, traditional parables, and interpretations of the carvings and cultural sites along the Red Rock Ridge. He retired after 28 years with the Minnesota Historical Society, but he is still engaged in the preservation and archaeology of the Red Rock Ridge. Since 2011, he's been a principal investigator along with Hamline University's Brian Hoffman on archaeological surveys for over 1,400 acres along the ridge. Tom is employed as an Indigenous archaeological specialist at Hamline University. He is a member of the Council for Minnesota Archaeology, the Plains Anthropology Society, the Society for American Archaeology. He has an MA in Interdisciplinary Archaeological Studies from the University of Minnesota. Thank you, folks. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the presentation.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
I'm going to talk about 23 years of Indigenous based research on the rock art of Minnesota's Red Rock Ridge. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our efforts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ridge's landscape, the Red Rock Ridge Research Group, elders' thoughts on the Red Rock Ridge and its rock art, conservation at Jeffers Petroglyphs, preservation of sites on the Red Rock Ridge, some of the surveys we've done, diversity and density of some of the types of sites on the ridge, and if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about a petroglyph experiment. The ridge is on the eastern edge of the Coteau des Prairies in southwest Minnesota. The lobe was the Coteau, which is a highland plateau, was created when 2 lobes off of the Laurentide Glacier scoured the sites, split and scoured the sites of the highland plateau and deepened the surrounding lowlands. And here's just another shot. The Coteau is 200 miles long and 100 miles wide. And again, the Red Rock Ridge and Jeffers Petroglyphs is on the eastern slope in southwest Minnesota. The ridge gets its name from the red quartzite bedrock that emerges to form horizontal outcrops in a tall grass prairie biome. Quartzite is made up of sand and clay, and that was deposited by shallow rivers over 1.65 billion years ago. The sand and mud were covered with millions of years of geological deposits, creating intense heat and pressure to form quartzite and claystone. Quartzite is 7 on the 10-point MOH mineral hardness scale. Diamonds register 10. It's a very hard substance, very hard to carve. The ridge, the ridge itself is the ridge that we're looking at here is 16 miles of the ridge, and it's and the rock outcrops and the sites are all encompassed in about a 30 square mile area. The ridge itself sits about 200 feet above the plain, and there are 3 rivers that drain off of the ridge that flow to the Minnesota River, flow through the Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood, and the Watonwan rivers. And of course, the carvings is the ridge is in the Dakota homeland, and its sort of importance, or it's why it's kind of famous, is because of the rock carvings found at Jeffers Petroglyphs Historic Site. There are on the ridge right now, we have counted up, there's more than 8,000 rock carvings on 27 of the 311 outcrops within an area encompassing 30 square miles. The outcrops here are shown in red. The main outcrop at Jeffers, where most of the carvings are, is 300 yards by 50 yards at its widest point. And this shot you're looking at is off of Google Earth, and it shows the trail that visitors walk out to see the carvings. Here you see a shot of 27 petroglyphs, a LiDAR shot that shows just the petroglyph sites. And here you'll see now I've added the 9 lithic scatters that are intense lithic scatters. Essentially, the whole ridge seems to be a giant lithic scatter, but they're intense in 9 places. 1 burial cairn is a green dot. There are 2 pipestone quarries. There's 1 pictograph site, 1 sacred boiling springs, 2 sacred waterfalls, 2 mounds. So it's a rich and complex district. The Red Rock Ridge Research Group was founded in was founded in 1998, and it's made up of American Indian elders and archaeologists whose goal is to promote the preservation of American Indian sacred sites on southwest Minnesota's Red Rock Ridge. The group believes in the most effective preservation program must have 2 approaches, research and education. Thus, the activities group are research, public education, and preservation. Although most of our focus is on cultural sites, the ecology, we know that Jeffers Petroglyphs is set in a larger landscape, and so we understand that there are connections, and we also look for those connections on a greater area. Some of our goals are documenting an American Indian elder understanding of the meaning, sacredness, significance of Jeffers petroglyphs and the Red Rock Ridge. Now, it has been a 23-year-long conversation with American Indian elders that continues today. The dialogue is a journey of mutual understandings, discovery, and mutual recovery of cultural knowledge. The elders teach that this dialogue has its roots in a continuous transgenerational dialogue that goes back for thousands of years. Often during our conversations, the sharing of knowledge began by the elders would when the elders started sharing the cultural knowledge, they would all start with, "This is what we were told by elders, and if I'm wrong, they will correct me." This is a statement, their statement signifies that the handed down cultural knowledge belongs to their elders and that they had been charged by their elders to accurately relay this knowledge to the next generation. Now here's a list of the group of elders that that this is a short group of some of the elders worked with, probably the main group over the 23 years. Unfortunately, most of these elders have passed. There are still some that are still engaged and still working, but most have passed. And these elders were mostly fluent speaking elders who grew up speaking their native language, and English was secondary, and they were all steeped in cultural knowledge. And why I was doing this and why we were doing this was the mission statement that I was given from the Minnesota Historical Society, and that's to provide knowledge appreciation of the rock carvings and the environment in which they are found. The mission will be accomplished by focusing on the creation, meaning of the glyphs, the culture of the people who created them, and the natural environment in which the glyphs and people existed. Now, like I said, most of them have passed, but the principal researchers of the group at this point are Robert Larson from the Lower Sioux community, Dakota community, Everett Black Thunder from the Siston-Wahpeton Dakota community, Brian Hoffman from Hamline University, and myself, Tom Sanders. Now, I'm going to go through some thoughts from elders. These are the thoughts that they started to teach me when I first went to Jeffers. Actually, my first contact with elders is I had worked with a Dakota woman by the name of Shar Shiaka, and she said that I should meet her brother, who was Joe Williams, and his friend Jerry Flute. And Joe Williams was at that time carried the pipe for the Lakota and Dakota people, had been on the tribal council, and Jerry Flute had been the tribal council member, and they were also members of the Medicine Wheel Coalition. But they were my first contact, and they asked me to speak at I just happened to be there and met them for breakfast, and this was about a week after I became manager, and they asked me to speak at a meeting of Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota people from across North America. Those people who all spoke a related language, even the Kanawaba from the Carolinas, of course, the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota from the Midwest. But one of the first things that Jerry Flute told me was that the carvings of Jeffers petroglyphs were an encyclopedia of American Indian culture and history. The carvings had multiple purposes, and this place is like a library. You can read them like an encyclopedia. They tell you a lot of the stuff, this area, the universe, and the earth, if you know how to read them. And Francis Brown, who was kind of the leader of the whole group, he's of course passed away, but they all looked to Francis whenever anything was brought up in any discussion. Francis was always the first speaker, and I've always appreciated this thought that he had. According to my people, what we believe and what we know, those who would understand the carvings have to spend a long time learning before they could understand. They are spiritually made for information. In the old days, old men knew how to interpret these. This is a sacred place. The spirits are there. This is what our life is all about. In order to know and understand these kinds of things, you have to have a kind of background to the old people who knew how to do those things, to know how to interpret these things. But he also said, don't never forget how to think simply. Think in a simple-minded manner. You can see things, you can understand things. Joe Williams, one of his first thoughts that he shared with me was, when I asked him, what's the purpose of the images being carved on the rock? Are these images just art, or are they messages to us? I think this would be a fruitful discussion between Native Americans, he replied. Our ancestors were prophets who carved these images on the rocks many thousand years ago. To me, the carvings represent the purity of purpose of all created beings. And kind of the basis of what they taught was that Jeffers' petroglyphs was a sacred place, a place of prayer, a place to seek healing and spiritual guidance, a place to seek knowledge. And you can see that here's one of the panels that at Jeffers, but the entire length of Jeffers now, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, since we removed the lichen covering, the entire ridge is just covered, just loaded in solid carvings. And when we began looking at Jeffers at the time, Gordon Losum had recorded 1971, and we're now well over 8,000 in the ones that we've uncovered. And who made the carvings? It is clear that some of the tribes who came through here, and they could have been tribes that were out of the East Coast, on the West Coast, way up north. And to me, within every one of those clans that migrated here, wherever they went, or which direction, they always had a historian with that group. I think he's suggesting the historical aspects of the meanings of the carvings. This is a quote from a Lower Sioux Dakota community elder of Vernal Wabasha in 1998. Several different tribes felt this site was a spiritual place. Even today, the site maintains that significance. It's a place of prayer, a retreat, a place of meditation. Medicine men still go out there, but they don't advertise that. Even the surrounding area of the rocks has meaning. It was interesting when I became site manager, one of the former site managers stayed on staff as my assistant and helped me. And she, first of all, told me that American Indians did not come to the site, and she'd never seen Indians. But one day I was explaining a tobacco tie, and she says, "Oh, that's what those were." People had been coming at night, so that not when people wouldn't see them, and would leave their offerings and come for their prayers at that time. So indeed, and the Indeed people had been coming, Native peoples had been coming to Jeffers over the years. And Carrie Schomer from the Upper Sioux Dakota community shared, "I always feel comfortable and ease, just myself, when I'm out there. And when you walk around there and just take your time, and it's like everything you feel and that is around you is as you're walking amongst the spirit of the people. And I know that they do enjoy our company, and the things, the signs, everything that they left out there for us is to remind us of who we are." Gordon Washteshte, who was born in 1924 and was near 90 when he shared this with us, and he was from the Sioux Valley Dakota community in Manitoba, said that someone seeking spiritual help would arrive at a site like this before dawn and wait for the carvings to appear. When the morning sun, long shadows made the carvings appear at their highest clarity. The carvings that would appear would be interpreted, and thus the carvings would give guidance to the speaker. This is his daughter, who was also traveling at that time with Gordon, said her grandmother told her of a place in her homeland called Iakago, which means stone, to mark or to draw a line. And this, I think, is a point of an important point for the research that we've done at Jeffers, is that Joe would always ask me about the dates of everything. He was always wanted to know, and all the elders would talk about dates. But what's interesting, because that was not what they felt was important. As Joe says here, modern technology estimate that these carvings to be 1,000-year-old, but the image of the female, the image to the right there that you see, represents a philosophy that was in existence for hundreds of years before being carved on a rock. To him, it suggested that the ancestors of Dakota and all Native peoples have long been in distance for a long time, and that's what it's telling him. Dating carvings at Jeffers is problematic. The carvings have been painted and chalked. Soil has blown in and out over the millennia. We know that from between 1966 and 1998, that much as 12 feet of dirt went up the outcrops and covered carvings, and those that had later been re-uncovered. Lichens have covered and uncovered the carvings. We removed a good percentage of the lichens, and looking at old aerial photos over the years, you could see that the lichen coverage has been going back and forth. And and I think that makes any sort of dating problematic, even luminescence dating or carbon-14 dating. However, we did an exploratory excavation when we were looking at preservation or conservation efforts, see how far the carvings went under the dirt along the southern edge or the lower edge of the outcrops. And indeed, they did go another 3 or 4 meters underneath there. And we did collect for future, for possible test, some soil samples. And the other problem is that I find is that we've got 8,000 diverse carvings spread over 300 yards by 50 yards that were possibly made sometime during the last 12,500 years. And so if we got a date out of one of the carvings on the lower edge, they wouldn't relate to all the other carvings. So I don't know what we're going to get. So we were kind of stuck with relative dating, and that's what we did. And as a working hypothesis, we compared the ridges carvings with the traditions described in Kaiser and Clausen's Plains Indian rock art. One of the things that's kind of notable, I think, is that all the traditions discussed by them, except the biographical tradition, are found on the Red Rock Ridge. And here's just some examples. We looked at some of the later carvings at Jeffers. I think are the hoof print out of the hoof print tradition they established. And you can see here some of the hoof prints, and there's lots of various buffalo, bear, human, and even possibly one horse. It's the only thing that I think might be associated with the horse at Jeffers Petroglyph. And by the way, there's no bows and arrows at Jeffers. And here you can see a bison hoof print, and you can see here one of Gordon Losum's recording that he did in the early 1970s at Jeffers, which is probably a seminal work on Jeffers, but certainly there's a lot more now to look at. I do think there's early hunting tradition. This group of 5 buffalo that I've taken out of this panel here, interesting. It's a herd of buffalo that seem to be traveling or moving or driven. And if you look at their horn size, they're arranged in a spiral. You go, here's the really tiny horns, bigger horns, bigger horns, bigger horns, and in the middle is a big horn. And this, as you can see, this is back in the time when they used to paint the carvings with the marine varnish, which hasn't been done since 1988. And this is when we uncovered the lichens. We had several elk pop up, and I'm using that to compare to the stuff that Alice Traderbus was recorded, and as early hunter tradition, and associated that was a possible very early date. But what's the most important thing to take from the site, according to Joe Williams, as well? It's left at Jeffers. It left its marks here. We were here for thousands of years, and the spirit that we believe in, the Great Spirit, our Creator, left here, the mark here with the people here. It will be for us for the rest of our lives. That's why, to us, it's a very special sacred area. It's a symbol. It left a symbol of our beliefs, our ways of life here. These markings that are left here are the survival of the people the spirit of the people. So the research was driven by, really driven by meaning, reconstruction of lost culture, and preservation. And here's some more of Joe's thoughts on that. For each created being, there is an image carved into rock as a reminder of their spiritual skills of survival as created beings. This was crucial for Joe. He always taught us to, he always asked questions, what do they say? Look at the carvings, what do they say? And for example, Joe explained to us that stories, the animals and stories in the old traditional stories are not there. They're not there just because they're cute. They're there because it has to do with their survival skills and their meaning. And for example, a wolf is generally the leader in any of the stories. And indeed, Joe would use this story to tell us a story about when an eagle was asking a question to the wolf. But if you look at this drawing, you'll notice that the legs are straight, the mouth is wide open, the ears are up. It looks like the hair is up on his back, tail is straight up. And according to David Mack, who studies wolf behavior, these are the attributes of a wolf showing dominance, or which would be the leader. And so that's the point that Joe was trying to make. Joe noted that there was an image at Jeffers, and that this became a very, very important image for Joe Williams. And he noticed that the images had fine features, and it looked like it had a shawl draped over one shoulder. And he said it marked this image of a woman. Images of a woman wearing a shawl are found in Mississippian art. Archaeologists believe that they represent first woman, Mother Earth, etc. And Joe said, there are many carvings grouped around here at this space suggesting a female form. The female form carved on a rock reminds me of Grandmother Earth, the creator, giving birth to every species that lives with us today. And there's another shot of what Joe's looking at, but to sort of see what he's thinking, what he thought looked like a shaw. And indeed, this carving does look much like, here's a Mississippian effigy jar from Tennessee that's from around 1000 to 1300 AD. There are lots of narratives of Jeffers. I think this group here might be possible related to some of the stories about Redhorn, like at Goshaw Rock Shelter and then at Painted Cave in Missouri. But I think this might be associated up here as at top is Redhorn with his one horn painted red and greased and painted red. And Redhorn was sent by the creator to help the people, and the giants were a troublesome thing for the people on Earth. And in one time, the Redhorn and his friends storms as he walks, and Wolf had a race with the giants, which might be they're represented by these two big feet, and and then to win the race, Redhorn turned himself into an arrow and shot himself to the goal line. One thing that Tom Ross, Dakota elder, that I spent so much time with, he and I traveled hundreds of miles, often from daylight to next daylight, but his focus became, he was looking at the carvings as protective symbols. And an example is this turtle found at Jeffers, and what's interesting, and we also use linguistics often to understand some meanings of these carvings, that the Dakota word for turtle is kea, which also means roof. And another example of that is they're often found on, of course, the turtles were found on on shields as protection symbols. But here's interesting. The only pictograph that I know of in the area is of this underwater spirit, probably a horned snake. And here's some on the left, and where I'm on the right here with the one that's actually, there are two waterfalls. This is right beside the waterfall on a very deep pool, a very sort of place that you would expect Unktehi, or the underwater spirit, as in the stories that I've been told. But on the left over here, this is one from up north in the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. And then at Jeffers Petroglyph, there are land versions of the underwater spirit, which you can see right in here. And this is a story that was just told me, and I won't tell the whole origin story, but just a little bit of it related to the underwater spirit. As humans spread across Ia and Makan, Unktehi decided to kill all the humans. To protect humanity, Daku Waka Ska Ska Sat Wakia to hunt Unktehi. The battles were seen in the lightning strikes. Unktehi was killed, and his skeletal remains forms the Red Rock Ridge. The rock carvings and images made by the boulders found on the ridge record the history of the surviving people and their descendants. Bob Larson said if you got high enough, you look down at Jeffers petroglyphs, you'd see a winter count. And again, it's a broad history. I'm going to talk a little bit about the conservation work we did at Jeffers. And this decision was not made we spent a number of years, essentially as soon as I came to Jeffers, visitors and a lot of people were after me to remove the lichens. And not until it got so bad around about 2004 that we had an explosion of a black lichen, which is actually very, very corrosive. Did I seriously start to think about maybe we needed to do that? And I formed a committee with MHS, Minnesota Historical Society, conservators and head of archaeology department and Dakota elders, and we studied that and did some studies to see if we could actually hurt the rock with anything. We did a bunch of tests with chemicals and things, not on carvings but off-site, and decided that perhaps we could do this. But what we decided to do it was with a rubber roofing membrane. And we left it on for about 7 weeks, and it would kill the lichens, and it just would be brushed away. And this is Charles Brosty, who is an archaeologist by training, but a staff member at Jeffers Petroglyphs, a site guide. And you can see the rubber roofing membrane. We did 1/3 at a time of the site, and then essentially we could either let the rain just wash it off when we removed the rubber roofing membrane, and when we did, we found 8,000 carving, at least 8,000. We based that on. We didn't actually try to go out and count them all. We just took an area like a 10-foot area and then counted them in there and extrapolated what we thought there might be based on the entire area of the rock face. And here. Again, here's Tom Ross, and this is one of the ways we see and look for carvings in the middle of the day when they're difficult to see. We use, again, it's a truck mirror that Chuck's got, and Tom Ross is that's a piece of plywood that's cast a shallow, and we redirect the light at a low raking light. But we recovered, again, lots of new carvings. Elks, you see some of the new carvings that we've uncovered. We uncovered a map that was 26 feet long, and you can see the map is along here, and you can see some dot trails in here. And matter of fact, what I think is really interesting about the snake that you see there is that it starts from cracks in our Ponca traditions about petroglyphs beginning in cracks. And if you look at the middle of the screen here, I hope you can see my cursor. And you can see there's a snake's head and the snake's body is in here, and even with the tongue that sticks out. Here you can see some maps. These are from 1825 that were recorded, done by Native peoples. Now, because we'd found some new carvings, it made it really nervous, and I used some of our conservation money to do white line scans, and we recorded over 2,000 carvings using the white line scan techniques. In 2009, one of the local quarries wanted to expand, and they asked me to get involved, and the county actually told them that they should get me involved. And we, Chuck Brosty and I, indeed, to help them get through their EAW to make sure we were protecting sites, did a survey. And this is one of the sites that we found there. It's a because it seemed to be focused on women, we kind of call it the women's ceremonial site. That's kind of just what we call it. And it was it's just at the south. Just you can see the quarry is here, and then that site is about right there. And here's we're using that technique of using the raking light made by a mirror and using cardboard to make shadows. Here's looks like a birthing scene. And again, elders thought that this was a place to teach girls about puberty, a birthing place, a healing place, a place to maybe come and prayer for a baby. And indeed, Dakota women now are bringing young girls there, interacting with the site. These are, we've identified now 7 petroforms on the ridge, and there's a series of kite-shaped petroforms. I know of at least 5 of these, 2 in South Dakota and 2 on the Red Rock Ridge, and actually 2 more in the southern part of the county, and they're shaped like a kite. And we first noticed these when I was asked to help. Joe Williams asked me to look at some sites in South Dakota. And a farmer took us to a field, and there were these kite-shaped petroforms, and Joe and I didn't have any clue what they were about. But I started noticing more, and as I studied one that was on the ridge, it was this shape, and after a while, we started finding alignments. And the basic core alignment here is to the equinox sunrise, and all these alignments, there's going to be 7 alignments I'm going to run through, and they are all dead-on accurate alignments. But they're all, what I think is I think there's some connection to what's going on out east with some of the Hopewell, the Dina Hopewell stuff. And you can see here that they're using mounds to do similar sort of things, creating this area and a place to record or view or create a sacred space. Here's another site. This is in northern Florida, another Hopewell site. It again shows a summer solstice alignment based on, again, the sort of triangulation. And some other stuff in Ohio. But again, that's the core alignment. And here's the basic alignments found. I'm going to go through these quickly. But this is the summer solstice sunrise, and that's looking through A through F through A. There's another shot at it. There's summer solstice sunset. There's the winter solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunset, spring equinox sunrise, sunset, and again, here's the basic alignments found there. But there's also one lunar, and this is recorded. This is the northern extreme for the 18.6-year lunar cycle. In 2011, Brian Hoffman called me and he had worked a little bit with Tom Ross, and he called me and offered his help to help us do the research. And that generated, gave us a lot of people to help us do surveys, and we got some grants, and we've surveyed now over 1,400 acres on the Red Rock Ridge. The whole point, we were trying to identify and understand the pre-contact habitation sites also on the ridge in the vicinity of Jeffers petroglyphs. The project proposes a phase 1 archaeological survey of high potential areas in proximity to Jeffers petroglyphs historic site in the northern tier of Cottonwood County. Here you can see in red, you can see the ones that we have done phase 1 surveys. And blue is where I have covered those areas looking for petroglyphs, or sort of my scouting efforts are covered in all those blue areas. But we're at 1,400 plus that have been systematically phase 1 survey. Here's one of the areas where we found new sets of petroglyphs. You can see the TNC sites, TN sites 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you'll see on TN7 is a quarry. We have 2, what we think are quartzite quarries on the ridge. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And but here I'm going to go through some slides of some of the new carvings that we found in some of these surveys. It's the only dog footprint I know. Cottonwood County has several sources, and actually Warren Upman was a geologist in 1880 who made this report. There's interesting, there is some pipestone on a ledge in section 9, which is the section that Jeffers petroglyph is in, and in enclosing rock and one ravine was a layer generally level, varying 4 to 6 inches of pipestone, or something somewhat like pipestone. And there are plenty of historic references to the Jeffers area as being a source of pipestone. Carver states that near a branch, which is termed the Marble River, is a mountain from which Indians get a sort of redstone of which they hew the bows of their pipes. And the pipestone, the monument is not on a tributary of the Minnesota, it's on a tributary of the Missouri and the Sioux River. And again, Nicollet, who came through in the 1830s, again made the same statement that Dakota people were getting their pipestone in the Jeffers area, which the Dakota name for is Emenesia Casadecha. Here's a Google Earth shot of one of the quarry, the longest quarry. There's a winter shot so you can see it. Here's some percussion marks where you can see where people were breaking out, and the spoils are there along with that. And indeed, at the bottom of the quarry is a layer of pipestone or soft carvable stone. This is a cupstone that's near that quarry. Our latest phase 1 survey was done when a quarry wanted to expand, and they had purchased some land nearby, 242 acres, and approached me about doing the survey, and which we did. And all the sites that we found are protected and will be protected. But again, I found another one of these kite-shaped petroforms there, and it lines up with the 18.6 year northern extreme lunar cycle. Here's a petroform in the shape of a buffalo head or a horned spirit, like this petroglyph from Jeffers petroglyphs. And it does have these 2 outliers that do line up with the winter solstice sunrise. But this is an area where it's the highest ground on the ridge, and it's at 1,430 feet above sea level. And it was interesting. We did extensive testing there. We found this petriform of a man. And on the left is a petriform of a man that's found about 40 miles east of Jeffers petroglyphs. And then here is on the right is a petroglyph found at the Pipestone National Monument that looks like that image. We did find one point that's right near the stone man, and it's an archaic point made of a gray chert, light gray chert. And right around that area is an extensive lithic scatter that seems to, the artifacts there suggest we found some worked pipestone and also some hammerstones, anvils and lots of cortex material, so their manufacturing points are preforms. And I'll end it with a quick overview of an experiment we did. And we tried a lot of different things to try to experiment to make petroglyphs. We couldn't find anything that would work. And indeed, one of our excavations, we found this piece of, so the campsites along the little Cottonwood River right near Jeffers was this Swan River chert cobble about the size of a baking potato that had been pointed. And that gave me some insight to try. And indeed, we did an experiment and found out that we could make a petroglyph in 42 minutes, and which I found quite surprising. And I'm done. Hello?
Yeah, you can unshare, and we can, at this point, if anyone has some questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. I think one of the questions has already been answered, and that is, what did you use to remove the lichen? So if the questioner has any more details they'd like about that, let us know. Otherwise, I will assume that that's been answered. I wondered, you mentioned doing a white line scan technique for documentation. Would you have anything else to say about that for those of us not familiar with it?
Oh, I think it's an outdated technique now. It took slices of photographs, and I'm not sure I understand it all, or I've forgotten what I did understand now. So I don't know if I can really say much. I don't. It did a fairly good job, and it's fairly. I thought it was fairly accurate, or high level of resolution. But you have to do it at night, or we had to use a tent to do it. I think there's stuff that superseded that now, and I'm not real familiar about all what's out there now.
Okay, so so what are you doing in terms of documenting nowadays?
We do just high resolution photographs.
Okay, so here's a question about, I think, what are some of the petroglyphs actually, what the images were. For example, something looked like it might have been atlatl or two in one of the early slides.
Yeah.
Are there any figures that are actually holding the atlatls?
Yes, there are. Yep, there are lots of figures holding atlatl. That group has the atlatls with the banner stones that are sort of, that's typical. It's one of the things that Gordon Losum used to date the site. They're typically found in the Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, and they're archaic. It gives us sort of a 5,000-year-old potential.
Yeah. So for the figures that are holding the atlatls, are they holding them in a launching position, or are they holding them? How are they holding them?
In a launching position, and also in a position of just. There's one image that I'm thinking of right now that appears to be holding an atlatl and then a dart in his hand.
Oh, interesting.
Not launched or anything, or not engaged, but that's what it appears to me. And of course, I'm always can be wrong and probably am.
Yeah, we've been having a discussion on Facebook about that same question. Somebody was asking, you mentioned Bannerstone in the context of the Atlatl. Could you describe that for people that aren't familiar with what that is?
It's a stone that's sort of in the center of an Atlatl, of course, is this stem that's got a hook on the end of it in some cases, and then a handle, and maybe some leather rings, or maybe metal, but rings are carved into the wood, and some are not. But in the center of that will be a stone for a weight, and they sometimes they're not very big, and they're skinny, and they're not any bigger than the shaft, and they're kind of boat shaped. But the others that we see so much at Jeffers is the ones that are often shaped like a rectangle, an oval, or hourglass sort of shape. But and I've heard lots of theories on what they are, whether they're social boundary markers, or some people thought they slid and would add more power. But I think the most probable is there's sort of a balance in there. I think that my understanding that the darts were fairly long and could be fairly heavy, and that Bannerstone may add just a way to balance the atlatl, that long shaft, or balance the holding that thing, particularly if you're holding it for a while, maybe waiting to throw it at some prey. And there's probably some meanings and reasons why they were made in those shapes.
Question about the petroforms. So you're talking about the alignments. I guess two questions there. One is, do those alignments also have some kind of horizon marker associated with them, or is it simply the stones?
The step of the stones, they're sighted like a gun sight.
Okay, so gun sight would imply a horizon marker, right?
Well, no, not on horizon. They're two stones.
Mm-hmm.
And I really couldn't tell. I kind of was worried about my time at that point, and I wouldn't kind of went through that pretty quick. Maybe I don't know if I can put it back up, but
yeah, go ahead.
Let me see if I can. I have to do a share again.
Yep.
Let's see if I can. As I'm looking at this, I will tell you that it was kind of unnerving not knowing where I was at or what people were doing, as I'm talking through this stuff. Okay. Here's an example. Here we go. See if this works. Yeah. You see the arrow points towards the horizon. But you line up these two rocks. You're back here behind it, and that will give you that alignment.
Yeah, okay. Now, were the elders familiar with this, or is this something that you diagnosed later?
They were involved in finding them and working through this, and they think they're very, very significant.
And they were aware that there were petroforms, but not necessarily that they were related to orientations.
No, they didn't. They didn't. No, they sort of the astronomy came later. But yeah, they were aware of petroforms, and they weren't surprised. I mean, they thought this was absolutely logical.
But they didn't have an interpretation for these petroforms beforehand.
No, no. But after we found the alignments, then they became very important
Uh-huh.
in their meaning to Sundance ceremonies.
Yeah. So if they were no longer using these alignments actively, what were they using instead? Just look at the calendar.
Yeah, they look at the calendar now. I mean,
Uh-huh.
yeah. You know, there are in some of the Mandan ceremonies, when the buffalo calling ceremony is done right around the winter solstice, and to figure out when it was appropriate time, an elder would leave the community and come back with the time, so many days, or whether it was the right time to do it. And the way these elders thought of that was probably the appropriate way to do this, and that's how they would have been used. And this is pre-calendar.
Yeah. So
I
someone
did
would
go through. I almost didn't even talk about this stuff because it probably needs a lot more time.
Uh-huh. Just to continue on the petroforms for a little bit, though, you showed one petroform that was similar to a petroglyph, right?
Right.
The person. Did you find
Right.
others that had sort of matching petroglyphs?
No, no, it's the only one we found like that on the
Uh,
ridge. The only human form.
yeah, but what animal forms or anything else that matched?
No, no.
No. Okay.
The buffalo head, that buffalo head it kind of matches that petroglyph head. You know, it's similar. I don't know if I think that'd be here. That one.
Yeah, interesting. So that was what they were interpreting it as, or is that another one that they
Yeah.
had to
No,
figure it out?
they interpreted that as that.
And had that been passed down, or is that something that they more recently
No, they didn't know
discovered?
about these. We found these.
Okay.
It's based on their cultural knowledge.
Right. Okay. So there wasn't any oral history about the petroforms.
No, no. Again, I think there certainly are from other communities about petroforms. I think there's Ponca traditions, but not in Dakota traditions. Matter of fact, when Theodore Lewis, who came through and worked in the 1880s, he talked to Dakota communities, and they didn't know anything about it. They were aware of them, but they didn't make them.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, that's where most of where he recorded, that's how he knew about it. And there are Dakota names for some of the other known ones in Minnesota.
Okay, I think we've gone through all the questions that we have had so far. If anybody wants to add a question before we sign off, we still have a minute or so to do that. See, I think you explained everything so well. We've exhausted our questions already. Yeah, okay. So I think that you can probably unshare